Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some Path of Exile 2 discussion. Actually, you know what? Even though this is going to be a short video, grab yourself two because you're probably watching this on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day. So, hope you all have an enjoyable, silly season. Today, I wanted to go through all of the patches since the last video where we discussed 0.4.0c. Now, I did a video before 04c went live, but the patch notes actually ended up pretty similar to what was discussed there, so we won't need to go through any real surprises there. There have been 8 hotfixes since, and because they've all been pretty small, this is going to be a relatively short video, but I did want to point out that there have been a number of last-second changes before Christmas. So note, this is probably what we're going to get for the next little while because Grinding Gear Games are going to be on Christmas sort of silly season break for a bit. It's not like there'll be absolutely no one there, but Christmas Day is a huge thing over in New Zealand. Anyways, there have been a series of 8 hotfixes since then, some of which were last week and some of which were today. One of the biggest ones here was the decrease in the damage of the Trail of Fire Rare Monster modifier. This was a Wrecking Ball previously. It still hurts, but it's not a Wrecking Ball anymore. Likewise, they nerfed the ground degen pools the Abyss monster Shepherd of the Pit creates. This, however, is not the really dangerous ground degen setup that comes up with Abyss. That is the desecrated ground, and the reason that that's so devastating is because sometimes it's very hard to see. I actually think the desecrated ground would be fine if it was fluorescent pink so that it really stood out, because it doesn't do devastating damage over time. It does quite a bit, but it's not devastating. However, at the same time, it shuts off all of your life recovery, and that makes it really dangerous. Because the first reaction you have when you notice your life pool going down and you're not sure why is not generally to move, it's to think, oh, I'm suffering from poisons or I'm suffering from an ignite. Let's tap my life flask. Well, that first reaction achieves nothing, and on top of that, you're still in the bad ground and you're unable to recover life by any means. This is why that one is so dangerous, and it's not one of the ones that's addressed here. But just remember this issue of Desecrated Ground and the Shadewalker mod, because we will come back to this later. Otherwise, a couple of minor things here. A really funny one related to the unique item Headhunter, where Soulflame geysers that were stolen by the player could actually trap the player inside of them. So something that was a bit comical. Definitely did come up and was annoying people who have that expensive item, but it wasn't something that had a huge widespread effect on a lot of the player base, mostly people with Headhunter. The next 2 hotfixes were very minor. The first one addressed a UI bug and another sort of weird couple of bugs that came up around the temple, and also a client crash. Then there was another one where Lunar Blessing, one of the werewolf skills, this was behaving a little bit badly in certain circumstances. However, Hotfix 4 was more significant. This wasn't the most significant of the hotfixes, but it's a pretty big one. So there was another issue that was coming up where player stolen Soulflame geysers were trapping the player. So the first one didn't catch every scenario, this one caught the rest of them. Jipicado, the Royal Architect, was behaving a little bit weirdly if you tried to lure him out of his room, and you were actually able to do that in certain circumstances. So that got fixed. Organized Forces and Beyond Reality Atlas passive notables, these were not working in certain situations, particularly where powerful map bosses were added through precursor tablets. So that got fixed. That was actually a pretty nasty bug, and it was an important one to get fixed. A number of other fixes came up here, but probably the most important ones. Jipicado, the Royal Architect, was dropping dumpster tier items. That got fixed here. Atsuru's Impatience had some bugs with it. That got fixed. And damage over time from Abyss monsters modifiers got fixed in this patch. So, Shepherd of the Pit, that got its monster damage nerfed. The damage over time from Soulflame geysers, Trail of Fire, but most importantly Shadewalker. All of these got nerfed at this point, and that was pretty substantial. Everything else in here was pretty minor. And now we have the big one, Hotfix 5. So this one's been live for a little bit over 48 hours at the time I'm making this video. The most important ones here relate to the loot that you get from killing monsters that are found in the temple. We're not talking about special monsters like Jipicado or Atsuri. Here, we're talking about the magic and rare monsters that are present. So, the chance for magic and rare monsters scales actually quite notably with the level of the temple. So you should see vastly more higher rarity monsters when you're running an endgame temple. Perhaps even more importantly, Atsuri's temple generates at level 81 rather than 80 when you're level 90 plus. Now, when Grinding Gear Games decided to add pausing to Path of Exile 2, this was always going to cause a couple of problems where the strongest way to play the game would be to abuse pause buffering in various situations. They mostly dealt with that through the use of a pause ban on boss encounters. However, there was a corner case that came up where you could intentionally disconnect and then do some shenanigans involving grace periods. And that was one of those things where there was a really anti-fun thing you could do to optimize. This was patched in 040C Hotfix 5. And on top of that, there was a crash fix. Hotfix 6 had a very important change as well. So a bunch of things here that were just crash related or just obvious bugs, but Atsuri and the Architect are no longer affected by map modifiers in the Vaal Temple. This is something that always causes problems. Bosses really need smaller map modifiers than regular monsters do, because bosses are just inherently more dangerous. So if you give a boss 40% increased AoE, that has a considerably larger effect than it does if you give that to a trash monster. And that can be particularly disruptive, especially when it comes to increasing monster speed. That is really lethal when it comes to bosses. So with 040C adding the ability to add map modifiers to the temple, well, Hotfix 6 came and made it so that they did not apply to two of the bosses there. And that's the last really significant patch. Hotfix 7, 1 client crash. Hotfix 8, another 4. And also an issue that was coming up for workbenches when you were playing with a controller. Anyways, that is the list of pre-Christmas patches. The most significant one of these definitely being Hotfix 5, the increases to the number of magic and rare monsters, which is a considerable increase to the amount of loot that you'll find in the temple. Now, this is where I would say, thanks for hanging out during the year. May your Vaal orbs have interesting results. But I did also want to plug my little side project I'm working on. This is a work in progress, and it is very much playing second fiddle to the Path of Exile channel. So that means that whenever things get busy, like has happened quite recently, I'm going to end up letting the second channel slide. However, I do have a fiction project that I'm working on, and I'll put a link to it down in the description below. It is a science fantasy lit RPG web serial. Currently, we've got 11 chapters up, a number of the interludes written, and I'm still trying to work out the exact order that those interludes are going to come up in, but they're narrated on YouTube, and I'm intending to have a text launch at some point in the future. Anyways, being a serial, of course, it is not in a completed state, so you may want to wait for the full thing to come out. Who knows how far off that'll be, though. If you're interested in following along, then the links are down below. I'm going to leave it there. May your Vaal orbs have interesting results.